Sarah's physical therapy sessions became her sanctuary. While rebuilding her strength, she also rebuilt her sense of self, piece by broken piece. Her therapist, Dr. Marcus Reed, had become more than just a medical professional. He was the first person who seemed to see her beyond her tragedy. "You're not just healing bones," he told her one afternoon, steadying her as she navigated the parallel bars. "You're healing your spirit." But healing didn't mean forgetting. During her long hours of recovery, Sarah had begun investigating the accident from 10 years ago. A position as a senior physician gave her access to old medical records, and what she discovered stunned her. The night of Emma's accident, there had been a third person in the car, another doctor, someone who had disappeared from Boston shortly after and never returned. The truth emerged like a body rising from deep water. Emma hadn't just been running from James that night. She'd been running toward someone else. The Tokyo Fellowship had been her excuse, not her reason. The pregnancy she'd lost had raised questions that no one had dared to ask, least of all James. Sarah waited until she could walk unassisted before confronting them both. She chose neutral ground, the hospital chapel where she'd spent countless hours during her recovery. Emma arrived first, elegant even with a slight limp from her recent injuries. James followed minutes later, the weight of unspoken words visible in his hunched shoulders. "I know about Dr. Anderson," Sarah said simply, watching their faces pale at the name. "I know he was in the car that night, Emma. I know why you really left." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma sank into a pew, tears streaming down her face. "How did you?" "Because unlike my husband, I know how to look beyond what I want to believe." Sarah's voice was steady, strong. "You never told James the full truth because you thought it would destroy him. And you," she turned to her husband, "you've spent 10 years idealizing a love that wasn't what you thought it was." James staggered as if struck. "The baby was never yours," Emma whispered. "I'm so sorry, James. I never meant." Sarah stood, her recovered body straight and proud. "I'm not here for revenge or closure. I'm here because we all deserve the truth. And the truth is, James, you didn't just leave me to die that night. You've been leaving me in small ways ever since we met, always chasing the ghost of something that never really existed." She placed divorce papers on the chapel's altar. They'd been signed the day before, her signature bold and unwavering. "I don't want to be someone's second choice or someone's redemption story. I want to be my own story." As she walked out of the chapel, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. Sometimes, she realized, the happy ending isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors had become Sarah's constant companion. 3 weeks after the accident, she lay in the premium suite of Boston General's trauma ward, her body held together by titanium rods and careful stitches. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was the same hospital where she had saved countless children's lives, now tasked with saving hers. "Dr. Thompson," a gentle voice broke through her morphine-hazed thoughts. "I've got your evening meds." Sarah turned to see Nina Chen, a nurse she'd worked with countless times in pediatrics. Something clicked in her mind. Chen, any relation to Emma Chen? Nina's hands stilled as she adjusted the IV drip. After a long moment, she perched on the edge of Sarah's bed. "She's my cousin, and I think you deserve to know the truth about her and James." The story spilled out like a wound finally lanced. Emma and James hadn't just been college sweethearts. They'd been pioneers. Together, they developed a groundbreaking protocol for pediatric trauma care during their residency. Their research was set to revolutionize the field, their names already whispered in talks of future Nobel nominations. They were the golden couple of Harvard Medical, engaged to be married, until Emma received the Tokyo Fellowship. James gave her an ultimatum, Nina said, her voice tight with old anger. He said if she took the fellowship, she was choosing her career over their future. But there was more to it than that. Sarah listened as Nina revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The night Emma left for Tokyo, there had been a terrible argument. Emma had stormed out in her car, and James had followed. In the rain, on a road very much like the one where Sarah's accident occurred, Emma's car had spun out. James had saved her then too, But the accident had cost them their research, their relationship, and the child Emma had just discovered she was carrying. He never knew about the baby, Nina whispered. Emma never told him. She thought it would be easier that way. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Now she understood the haunted look she sometimes caught in James's eyes when they lost a young patient, why he'd been so hesitant to discuss having children of their own. As if summoned by the weight of these secrets, James appeared in the doorway. He looked haggard, his surgical precision replaced by trembling hands and bloodshot eyes. But Sarah noticed his rumpled clothes were the same ones he'd worn while visiting Emma's room down the hall. "Sarah," he started, but she cut him off. "How is she?" Sarah's voice was steady, surprising even herself. "She's awake. She's asking about that night. About what really happened 10 years ago." James sank into the visitor's chair, his face ashen. "I don't know what to do." Sarah looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw not the confident surgeon she'd married, but a man drowning in the undertow of his past. "Yes, you do," she said quietly. "You just don't want to admit it. You never stopped loving her, did you?" His silence was all the answer she needed. The charity gala at Boston General had been a triumph, raising millions for the new pediatric wing. Sarah should have been celebrating, but the weight of the hidden photograph had haunted her throughout the evening. She hadn't missed how James's smile faltered when Chief of Surgery Dr. Martinez mentioned a new cardiothoracic surgeon joining their team next month. Thunder growled overhead as they left the hospital, the first fat droplets of rain splattering against the windshield of James's Tesla. Sarah had suggested taking the direct road home, but James insisted on the coastal road, a decision that would alter their lives forever. "Remember our wedding night?" James asked, his voice unusually wistful as they curved along the darkened coastline. The storm was just like this. Lightning illuminated the sky, and in that brief, brilliant flash, Sarah saw it. A black Range Rover swerving wildly ahead of them. The luxury SUV hydroplaned, spinning toward the guardrail in a terrible dance of metal and momentum. James slammed the brakes, their Tesla skidding to a halt 50 yards away. "Call 911, James shouted, already running toward the wreck. Sarah grabbed her phone, but something made her follow him into the rain. The Range Rover had broken through the barrier, its back wheels suspended over a 40-foot drop to the churning ocean below. Sarah reached the vehicle just as James wrenched open the driver's door. The world seemed to stop. There, illuminated by the Tesla's headlights, was the woman from the photograph, Emma Chen, a decade older but unmistakable. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, her designer dress glittering with embedded glass. "Emma!" James's voice cracked. "Oh God, Emma!" The sound of screeching tires shattered the moment. Sarah turned to see a pickup truck spinning toward them, its driver slumped over the wheel. She tried to run, but her heel caught in a storm drain. The impact was explosive. The truck slammed into their parked Tesla, sending it careening toward her. Pain erupted through Sarah's body as the vehicle pinned her against the guardrail. Through the curtain of rain and agony, she saw James's face as he turned toward the sound of impact. Their eyes met for one eternal second. Then he turned back to Emma's car, which had started to slip further over the edge. "James." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "James, please." But he was already pulling Emma from her vehicle, cradling her unconscious form with the same tenderness Sarah had once thought was reserved for her. The guardrail beneath Sarah groaned, twisting metal shrieking a warning of imminent collapse. The last thing Sarah saw before consciousness faded was James carrying Emma to safety, while the rain washed away any trace of the tears streaming down her face. In her final moments of awareness, a bitter truth crystallized. Sometimes the person you trust to save your life is the same one who leaves you to die. The renovation of their Victorian home's office hadn't been Sarah Thompson's idea. James had insisted they needed the space updated before winter, though he'd been peculiarly hands-off about the actual work. Now, as Sarah knelt on the hardwood floor, examining a loose baseboard that the contractors had flagged, she understood why. Her fingers brushed against something behind the wood panel. The photograph she pulled out was worn at the edges, its colors slightly faded, but still vivid enough to tell a story she'd never known. There was James, younger but unmistakable, his arm wrapped around a beautiful Asian woman. They wore matching Harvard Medical School hoodies, and the intimacy in their shared smile made Sarah's chest tighten. What caught her attention most wasn't their obvious closeness. It was the way James looked at this woman, with an intensity she'd never seen in his eyes, even on their wedding day. The sound of James's Tesla pulling into the driveway sent her heart racing. Sarah quickly snapped a photo of the image with her phone before sliding the original back behind the baseboard. As a pediatric surgeon, she'd learned to trust her instincts, and something about this discovery felt too important to ignore. "Sarah," James's voice echoed through their restored foyer, "I brought that Thai food you like." She composed herself, brushing dust from her designer jeans as she descended the stairs. James stood in their gourmet kitchen, his surgeon's hands methodically unpacking the takeout containers. At 42, he was still as handsome as the day they'd met during their residency, salt and pepper hair at his temples only adding to his appeal. "How's the renovation going?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. Sarah studied him carefully. "Found something interesting today," she said, watching his reaction. An old photograph. The takeout container in James's hands stilled for just a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Sarah had spent years reading minute changes in patients' expressions. "Probably left by the previous owners," he said smoothly. "You looked happy," Sarah pressed. "You and the woman in the Harvard hoodie." James's facade cracked, just slightly. He set down the container and gripped the marble countertop, his knuckles whitening. "That was a lifetime ago, Sarah. Does this lifetime have a name?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, James spoke, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Emma. Her name was Emma Chen. And you're right, I was happy. But that's ancient history." Sarah watched as he turned away, busing himself with wine glasses they didn't need for takeout. In 7 years of marriage, she'd learned to read the stories in James's silences. This one screamed of unfinished chapters. "Ancient history has a way of leaving marks," she said quietly, thinking of the photograph's careful placement behind the baseboard. This hadn't been accidentally lost, it had been deliberately hidden. James's response was interrupted by both their phones buzzing simultaneously, the universal signal for an emergency at Boston General. But as they rushed to their separate cars, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just scratched the surface of a much deeper truth. She didn't know it yet, but that photograph was about to become the least of her concerns.